"Officer, I have provided all the necessary documentation," Marcus said, his voice calm but firm. "I have not violated any laws. This is unnecessary." "Shut your mouth," Caldwell snarled. He didn't even bother to look Marcus in the eye as he began to search him in a deliberately humiliating manner, pressing down hard on Marcus's chest and shoulders as if he were handling a dangerous criminal. The rustling of rubber gloves under the pale streetlight sent a chill down his spine. "There are signs of alcohol use. We need to conduct a sobriety test," Caldwell declared without any valid reason. "I haven't had a drop of alcohol," Marcus said. His voice was low but loaded with pressure. As a black man in a tailored suit, he was all too familiar with suspicious gazes. But he never imagined he would be publicly degraded like this, as if his skin color alone determined his guilt. Passing vehicles began to slow down. Pedestrians pulled out their phones to record, but no one intervened. A white man in a truck muttered, "Probably not so innocent after all." "Physical test," Caldwell ordered, making Marcus stand on one leg, close his eyes, and walk a straight line, task clearly difficult for an older man. Marcus struggled to maintain his balance in the cold rain, while faint laughter hissed behind him. His phone buzzed inside the car. "That might be my son. I promised him I'd be there for dinner," Marcus said, trying to remain composed. Caldwell ignored him, forcefully opened the car door, and snatched the phone. "No communication. You could be sending codes to some other black accomplice." "Officer, you are overstepping your authority." Immediately, Caldwell activated his radio. "Caldwell here, requesting backup at the corner of Burwood and Maple. Black male subject, uncooperative, possible weapon possession, potentially dangerous." "You're making this up," Marcus said, unable to hide his anger. "Keep talking, and I'll add resisting arrest." Caldwell smirked. "You people think flashing a judge's badge makes you untouchable?" Sirens wailed. Another patrol car pulled up. Officer Brennan stepped out, his hand resting lightly on his holstered gun. As he approached and saw Marcus's face clearly, the tension on his face vanished. "Judge Marcus Washington?" Brennan stammered, clearly in disbelief. The atmosphere shifted instantly, from threatening to awkward. Brennan straightened up and saluted. "I apologize, sir. There has been a serious misunderstanding." Caldwell's face turned pale, but he tried to recover. "I was just following protocol." "You disabled both your body cam and the dash cam," Marcus cut in coldly. "Shall I list how many laws you've broken?" Brennan looked at Caldwell as if realizing he was a danger. But what Marcus couldn't ignore was the look Caldwell gave Brennan. Not the look of a subordinate fearing discipline, but of two men sharing a dirty secret they had to protect. "We deeply regret the incident," Brennan said, his voice stiff. "You are free to go." Marcus didn't rush. He looked at both officers, one hiding his hatred behind a badge, the other so polite it seemed suspicious. Then he turned and walked slowly back to his car, each step feeling like pulling himself from the mud of a system he once believed was just. As the Cadillac started, he saw both patrol cars still stationary in his rearview mirror, but something in his gut wouldn't let him relax. And he was right. Just 3 blocks later, both patrol cars appeared behind him, keeping a consistent distance but matching his speed. Marcus changed lanes. They followed. Turned down an alley, they followed again. This was no longer a patrol. This was surveillance. At the next intersection, when Marcus stopped at a red light, both cars accelerated. One swerved ahead to block him, the other moved in close behind. Marcus didn't have time to speak before the patrol car doors flew open, and what he saw made his breath catch. Both Caldwell and Brennan had drawn their guns. Brennan, the same man who had called him "Sir" just minutes before, now showed no sign of respect, only cold, vacant eyes. Once again, Marcus was staring down the barrel of a gun, not because of his actions, but because of his skin. "Out of the vehicle! Hands high and visible!" Brennan shouted, his voice sharp with urgency and violence. His gun was aimed directly at Marcus's head, unwavering. Marcus was frozen. He hadn't yet recovered from the earlier humiliation, and now he was being held at gunpoint again. "Officer Brennan! You just let me go. What is happening?" "New intel from HQ. Exit the vehicle immediately." Brennan's voice was now devoid of emotion, cold to the core. Marcus immediately understood what had happened, and it chilled his blood. In their prior exchange, Caldwell had convinced Brennan that Marcus was an imposter, a con artist pretending to be a high-ranking official. Perhaps he spun a tale of a professional fraudster exploiting the identity of a prominent black figure to deceive the police. This time, there was no doubt. Brennan fully believed Caldwell. Marcus opened his door with trembling hands. His mind raced with a terrifying reality. His life was in danger. A black man facing 2 drawn guns, with no witnesses to ensure he left the scene alive. "I am Judge Marcus Washington of the United States Supreme Court," he declared, voice trembling with suppressed fear. "You are making a grave mistake and will be held legally accountable." But his words were like air. "Face down on the ground," Caldwell hissed. "Hands behind your back now." "At my age, lying flat like that could be dangerous for my spine and hips," Marcus tried to explain, holding on to his composure. "Didn't you hear me? Get on the ground," Brennan shouted, the sound of his boots slamming against the rain-slicked pavement acting like a threat. Marcus had no choice. He slowly knelt, then lowered himself onto the freezing sidewalk. His face touched the ground, collecting dust and dirty water, just like countless other anonymous victims in those heartbreaking images that once flooded American news reports. Caldwell didn't miss the chance to humiliate him. He grabbed Marcus's arm and twisted it behind his back, locking on a pair of large steel handcuffs. The cold clack of metal echoed as they tightened around his aging, fragile skin worn thin from decades of serving justice. "They're too tight," Marcus groaned. "Gotta keep slick ones like you locked down tight," Caldwell replied with a smirk. Brennan began to pat Marcus down while Caldwell rummaged through the car. Marcus turned his head to look. At this point, the violation had surpassed personal insult. It was now an affront to the very justice system he once represented. "You can't search my vehicle without a warrant," he shouted, knowing full well that the voice of a handcuffed black man held no weight against 2 aggressive white officers. Back at the patrol car, Caldwell peeked into the trunk, then slipped his hand into his inner jacket pocket. Something small and square pressed against the fabric, as if it had been prepared ahead of time. Moments later, Caldwell returned holding a small plastic bag filled with white powder. A triumphant smile spread across his face. "Let's see what our Mr. Washington has been carrying around," he said, lifting the bag like a trophy. Marcus stared at the bag, knowing full well it was planted, and knowing he was now facing a setup. "You planted that," he said, no longer trembling, but furious. "That wasn't in my car before you searched it. Now listen here," Caldwell said, crossing his arms. "Impersonating a federal official, obstructing law enforcement, and now drug possession. That's quite the list, Your Highness." Marcus felt his chest tighten. Sharp pain radiated from his chest down his left arm. "I need medication," he said, breath ragged. "It's in my coat pocket. I have a heart condition." Brennan showed no concern. "We'll see about that once you're at the station." He was shoved into the back seat of the patrol car like some ragged addict. No trace left of the judge who had once presided over historic courtrooms. When the door slammed shut, Marcus rested his head against the window. For the first time in 40 years on the bench, he wondered, is justice just a pretty mask for power's handwriting? From behind the partition, he could hear the 2 officers laughing. "We're definitely getting commendation for this one," Caldwell said. "Caught a fake federal judge. That'll make the news for sure." 20 minutes later, the car pulled into the lot of the Oakwood Heights precinct. Marcus was dragged from the car, wrist mouth still cuffed. The stunned expressions of the officers on duty were clear. Some recognized him, but no one dared speak, not when 2 armed officers were escorting a supposed criminal. At the intake desk, a young sergeant looked at Marcus, confused. "Judge Washington?" "Impersonator," Caldwell cut in quickly, as if afraid Marcus would have time to explain. "Drugs in the vehicle, fake documents too. Book him on everything." The sergeant hesitated, glancing back and forth between Marcus and the 2 officers. Something inside him wrestled, between duty and personal conscience. "Sir," he asked, "are you really Judge Washington?" "I am Marcus Washington, and I've been framed, humiliated, and targeted solely because of my skin color," he replied, each word steady despite his uneven breath. The sergeant glanced at Brennan. I need to report this to my superior." "Just lock him up," Caldwell snapped. "We'll sort it out later." Despite the sergeant's hesitation, the ruthless gears of the system kept turning. Without any further verification, Marcus was processed like an anonymous offender. All his belongings, an old leather wallet, a wedding ring, and the watch gifted by the Judicial Association, were tossed into a plastic zip bag like trash. Mugshots, fingerprints, step by step, he was turned from a man into a number by the very system that once vowed to uphold justice. And the most chilling part was, he knew that system because he had served it his entire life. "I have the right to make a phone call," Marcus said as he was escorted toward the holding cells. Caldwell muttered something unclear, then shoved him forward like a nobody. He was thrown into a cramped, suffocating holding cell, packed with other young black men, faces too young to have seen so much disappointment in life, but far too familiar with the contemptuous stares of white police officers. Some looked at him curiously. A well-dressed older black man in a wrinkled dress shirt, tie pulled to the side from being yanked. He sat on the cold iron bench, trying to keep his posture upright, but the flickering fluorescent lights in the thick air, filled with sweat, bleach, and despair, made his heart beat faster with every thud. Sweat poured down his face, his chest tightened, and pain radiated along his left arm. "I need medical attention," Marcus shouted, voice hoarse. "I have a heart condition. I need to be checked." A white officer walked past without even looking at him. Heart problems, delusions, lawyer requests, every inmate says the same thing. Marcus's vision began to blur. Everything became heavy and chaotic. He tried to stay upright but eventually collapsed forward, one hand clutching his chest, the other gripping the edge of the bench. A young man with braided hair stood up. "He's seizing! Hey, somebody get in here now!" He banged loudly on the steel door. The shouting inside the cell finally drew the attention of the officer on duty. An officer approached, reluctantly unlocked the door, then shouted into his radio for medical assistance. Marcus could barely catch snippets of frantic voices. "Emergency transfer or not? Take him to the infirmary first. If he dies here, the media will have a field day." The world in front of him faded into a heavy gray. In his last moment of consciousness, he thought only of Michael, his son, and whether he knew what was happening. Across the city, Michael Washington stared at his phone screen. His father's location dot, normally visible through their family app, was now showing offline. "This isn't like him," he muttered. "He never disappears without a word." Serena, his wife, walked out from the kitchen, oven mitts still on her hands. "Have you tried calling again?" "I did earlier. It went to voicemail." Their 12-year-old twins, Malcolm and Maya, stood at the base of the stairs. The whole family was still waiting for their traditional Sunday dinner, but no one felt like eating. "Maybe his car broke down," Maya said, though her voice faltered. Michael shook his head. "If that were the case, he'd borrow someone's phone to let us know. He'd never leave us worried like this." Michael's expression sharpened. As a black man who'd seen too many incidents that never had answers, he couldn't stop his mind from jumping to darker possibilities. "I'm going to check his usual route home. Serena, call the local hospitals and check with the police departments too." At the Oakwood Heights Precinct Infirmary, Dr. Thomas Chen was struggling to stabilize Marcus's blood pressure, the numbers on the monitor bouncing wildly like a fire alarm. "We need to transfer him immediately to Virginia Memorial," Dr. Chen shouted to the commanding officer who had just arrived. Chen was inserting an IV line, but when he pulled down Marcus's mask to assess his breathing, he froze. "My God, this is Judge Marcus Washington?" "He claimed to be," the commander replied awkwardly. Number I shook his hand at the Supreme Court swearing-in ceremony. "I remember clearly." Dr. Chen's face darkened. "And you cuffed him to a hospital bed? 73 years old with a documented heart condition, and you brought him in like this?" Caldwell stepped in. "Precinct policy says we must restrain all detainees during transport." "Policy doesn't override human life," Chen snapped. "If he dies because treatment was delayed, it won't just be me. It'll be every media outlet in the country writing about your names." Dr. Chen personally removed the handcuffs. "Call an ambulance." Now, and I will document every detail, every word in his medical record. The tense standoff between medical ethics and police power was interrupted by static from the commander's radio. "Commander, word from local reporters. Several news stations are asking about the unusual absence of Judge Marcus Washington. They say he failed to appear at a nationally televised event." A hush fell over the room. No one spoke, but everyone understood. The media storm was forming, and it threatened not only the department's reputation, but potentially the entire system if the truth came out. "Call the ambulance now," the commander barked, eyes narrowing on Caldwell. "No one says a word. No leaks until I get a handle on this." 15 minutes later, Marcus was placed on a stretcher, an oxygen mask covering half his face. His heart rate had temporarily stabilized thanks to emergency medication, but he was still under watch. Caldwell sat by his head in the ambulance, eyes locked on him as if he were a criminal ready to flee. Meanwhile, Michael Washington left the cemetery, the route his father usually took home, still with no trace. Roads that were once familiar now felt hostile and unfamiliar. With no other choice, he began calling every nearby police station. "This is Michael Washington. I'm looking for my father, Judge Marcus Washington. He hasn't returned home, and he's not answering his phone. This is completely unlike him." After numerous unsuccessful calls, a sergeant at Oakwood Heights finally replied. "You should come down here," the sergeant said, voice stiff. "Has something happened to my father? An accident? Was he assaulted?" Michael asked, his heart pounding. "I can't explain over the phone, but if you're family, you should come immediately." Michael ended the call, heart racing, and turned his car around at once. As he weaved through early evening traffic, a call came in from an unknown number. He switched to speakerphone, hands tight on the wheel. "Mr. Washington, this is Dr. Thomas Chen, Cardiology Department, Virginia Memorial Hospital. Your father, Mr. Marcus, is currently in stable condition after a severe hypertensive episode." Michael exhaled in relief, then quickly shifted to urgency. "Why is he in the hospital? What happened? Is anyone with him?" There was a brief pause, then Dr. Chen lowered his voice. "There's a police officer posted outside his room. From what I understand, your father is still considered to be in custody." Michael could barely believe his ears. "What? He's under arrest? For what?" "I wasn't given that information," Chen replied, "but you're his legal next of kin. You have the right to visit him, regardless of legal status." Michael immediately changed direction, driving like a man on fire toward the hospital, his mind spinning with unanswered questions. Why was a renowned black judge being treated like a criminal? At Virginia Memorial Hospital, Marcus had regained consciousness. Though his complexion had improved slightly, the humiliation remained raw. Even lying in a hospital bed, hooked to IV lines and heart monitors, he was being watched, as if the moment they looked away, he might escape. The door swung open. Michael rushed forward but was blocked by Caldwell. "This is a restricted area," Caldwell said, hand resting near his weapon. "The patient is currently under detention." "That man is my father, Marcus Washington, Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court," Michael declared, every word sharp and deliberate, as if reciting a constitutional proclamation. "And I have the legal right to see him." The confrontation drew the attention of nurses, doctors, and even bystanders, some of whom had begun filming with their phones. Within seconds, Dr. Chen arrived and stepped between them. "Officer Caldwell, visitation rights for immediate family are inviolable. You have no legal grounds to block him." Caldwell clenched his jaw but stepped aside. 5 minutes, and no discussion of legal matters. As Michael entered, he nearly stumbled at the sight of his proud father, a lifelong symbol of justice, now lying still, his hand taped from an IV line. "Michael," Marcus said softly, voice faint but eyes sharp as steel. "Thank you for coming. We need to act immediately." Michael leaned down, taking his father's hand, the same hands that once held the gavel in countless rulings, now cold and trembling. "They said you were arrested? On what charges?" Marcus took a breath and responded with the tone of a scholar, despite his recovering heart. "A setup, abuse of authority, based entirely on the color of my skin. They pulled me over, searched illegally, then planted evidence. When I objected, they cuffed me like I was some drug dealer." Michael clenched his jaw. "I'm calling Eliza, right now." Eliza Chen, civil rights attorney and former federal prosecutor, was the one person who could turn this flame of outrage into legal firepower. Just as Michael dialed, a nurse entered with an update. "Chief Morris is on his way. Media's outside. He's requested to meet with Judge Washington." Michael turned toward the window. News vans were pulling up in front of the hospital. Cameras were being mounted like cold, unblinking eyes, ready to either expose the truth or bury another systemic crime if no one spoke up in time. Supreme Court Justice missing during national conference. Story shakes Washington. The breaking headlines scrolled across screens inside Virginia Memorial Hospital as Police Chief Raymond Morris hurried down the cardiology wing, heels echoing across the sterile tile floor. 58, seasoned and politically calculated down to his smallest gesture, Morris had weathered dozens of media storms, but never one where CNN's cameras were camped outside, his name flashing beside the country's most prominent black judge in a wrongful arrest scandal. Inside the hospital room, Michael hung up after speaking with Eliza Chen. She was on her way, bringing a team of civil rights attorneys and an emergency court order for witness protection. "She'll be here in 20 minutes, he said softly, eyes still fixed on his father. "Your absence is trending nationwide." Marcus gave a faint nod, the steel returning to his gaze. "Good. Mold grows in the dark. Light is the strongest antibiotic." A firm knock came at the door, and then 3 people entered. Morris, the hospital administrator, and, most surprising of all, Oakwood Heights Mayor Patricia Dorson. Their faces were stiff, not from guilt, but because they knew they no longer controlled the narrative. "Judge Washington," Morris began, voice gravelly, "on behalf of the police department, I offer our deepest apologies for the serious mishandling of today's incident." "Mishandling," Marcus repeated, his voice sharp as a razor. "Your officers violated the 4th and 8th Amendments. They disabled cameras, conducted illegal searches, planted evidence, and denied urgent medical care." "Don't insult my intellect with the word mishandling," Mayor Dorson interjected, trying to steer the room toward moderation. "We're here to make things right. All charges have been dropped. The involved officers have been temporarily suspended and are under internal investigation." Michael spoke through gritted teeth. "Still on payroll? And what, back on patrol in a few weeks after a paid vacation?" Chief Morris pulled out a stack of papers and placed them on the table next to the bed. "This is a memorandum of clarification, acknowledging the incident as a misidentification due to an identity verification error. If you sign it, we'll consider the matter resolved." Michael picked it up and glanced through it. A thinly veiled liability waiver. "You think my father will sell his silence to help whitewash the racist machine you run?" Meanwhile, at Oakwood Heights Police Headquarters, Caldwell, pale as a sheet, was sitting in front of a computer, following instructions from legal counsel on how to delete data. "Wipe every file, every access log. The camera was broken. Stick to that statement." "What about GPS route data?" Caldwell asked, sweat beading on his forehead. "Handled by the tech department. Don't ask further. Nothing exists outside the official report." At a separate impound lot, 2 officers were following a special order. "Clean out the Cadillac. Not a trace left. We can't let anyone find that bag of white powder without Marcus's fingerprints on it." Back at the hospital, Morris was starting to lose patience. He lowered his voice, shifting tactics. "Sir, taking this public won't just damage the police department's image. It could also tarnish the credibility of the Supreme Court. The press will dig into your whole family." Michael raised an eyebrow. "Are you threatening a federal judge?" "Not at all," Morris replied, his gaze cold. "I'm just referring to community consequences, like your grandchildren at Oakwood Prep. The school may need extra security if the public turns on them. It would be an unfortunate disruption." The room went ice cold. Even with 4 lines still taped to his arms, Marcus stared Morris down, unblinking. "Chief Morris, in my 40 years of dealing with abusers of power, I've never met one foolish enough to threaten a judge's family to his face." Before Morris could reply, the door swung open. Eliza Chen entered with 2 assistants and a briefcase full of documents. "Judge Washington," she announced, completely ignoring the officials in the room. I've filed for immediate evidence preservation and notified the Federal Civil Rights Division. Morris went pale. You might want to reconsider. Eliza doesn't make threats, Marcus interrupted. She takes action. Before the police group could leave, Morris leaned down, his voice low and dripping with menace. No matter who you are, you still live in my city. And in this city, all resistance has a cost. As they disappeared through the door, Marcus looked at Michael. He motioned for his son to lean in and whispered, "They don't know one thing. When the nurse came in to run the EKG, I activated the recorder on my watch. Everything, the threats, the deals, the lies, it's all there." Michael's eyes widened, then narrowed with purpose. Even if it can't be used in court, it'll be a fatal blow in the court of public opinion. Marcus nodded, his voice as solemn as when issuing rulings from the federal bench. Retrieve the watch from my personal effects. Download everything, before they realize what's been exposed. Michael left the room in silence, footsteps firm. As the door closed, Marcus turned to Eliza. This cannot end with a complaint. I want a full investigation, federal level, not just about me, about the entire structure of racial bias embedded in their system. His eyes gleamed with the intensity of a man who had made attorneys bow with a glance. This wasn't one bad night. This is a systemic illness, and it's time to cut it open. Outside the hospital, camera lenses aimed at the main entrance like silent rifles. White reporters jostled for the best angle, some holding microphones, others shouting, "Was he assaulted? Is there a drug connection, like the leaked police report suggests? Why is the Supreme Court remaining silent?" No one mentioned race, but every gaze regarded him as a black exception in a system that was never built for him. Meanwhile, at Oakwood Heights Police Headquarters, the cover-up was reaching its peak. Files were altered with undocumented verbal orders. Entire sequences of security footage had accidentally vanished. The internal servers were accessed by the IT team, two mid-level officers loyal to Morris. What they hadn't expected, Marcus's recorder hadn't just captured threats. It caught a detail that could shake the entire institution. Scrub the hospital hallway footage too. We need someone on the inside for that. We can't have the scene of him collapsing after begging for medical help getting out. Near midnight, a random traffic stop had turned into a battle for survival between a black man who once represented justice and the very system that claimed to uphold it. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the window and touched Marcus's face. The man who had just survived a severe hypertensive episode, but his eyes no longer looked tired. They belonged to a warrior just returned from the trenches. Michael and Eliza Chen sat at the hospital's cafeteria table, papers spread before them. The police department's gag agreement marked in red, along with encrypted copies of the recorded audio. If you sign, you won't be allowed to disclose anything. Not to the press, not to Congress, not to the Department of Justice, Eliza said, flipping through the pages. They're buying silence with promises to protect reputations, but only theirs. Marcus looked at the drive Michael handed over, a secure device containing 3 copies of the recording. Have they been delivered? Michael nodded. One to Eliza, one to Elijah Moore, the investigative journalist in Atlanta. The last one was sent encrypted to your former attorney in Chicago. Marcus exhaled slowly. Good. If they want to strike, let them know we're armed too. The door burst open. The hospital administrator entered, visibly tense. Judge Washington, Chief Morris is back. And this time he's brought William Hargrove, the district attorney. Marcus gripped the bedrail tightly. Eliza stood up, eyes sharp like an unsheathed blade. Morris entered without waiting to be invited. His smile, perfected through 1,000 press conferences, barely concealed his unease this time. Judge Washington, I hope you're feeling better this morning. Marcus's face remained stone cold. Well enough to recognize a political maneuver, just dressed differently. Hargrove, tall, white, dressed in an expensive gray suit, stepped forward and extended a hand. Marcus left his hand resting on the blanket. We're here to ensure that the matter is reviewed thoroughly and transparently, Hargrove said. Marcus smirked. From an office that has blocked every internal investigation into the police for years? Sorry, I'll need more than assurances. Hargrove slid a document across the table. More refined, lengthier, but still a gag order disguised as a reconciliation agreement. No one loses their job. The police department accepts collective responsibility. The media will be redirected using a pre-drafted statement. Marcus flipped a few pages, then looked up. And if I refuse? Morris clenched his jaw. Then you enter a media whirlwind that drags your family through the public square. The air exploded silently. Morris sat at the edge of the bed. I know about Malcolm, last year, and some students at Oakwood Prep, where your grandson studies. There are residency status issues. I'm just saying, the media will dig it up if you open that door. Michael stood abruptly. You're threatening children? Morris shrugged. I'm only speaking of consequences. Everyone's a citizen, and every citizen has a record. Marcus stared at him for a long time, the gaze of a man who had passed judgment on hundreds, then turned to Eliza. He thinks he can break me with fear, the same fear used for centuries to threaten black people. Then he looked back at Morris. Chief, you're wrong. My career is longer than yours, and I've faced more dangerous men than you. But none have stooped as low as you. Morris growled, Everyone has a limit, sir. Marcus leaned back, smiled lightly. And you've just found mine. He reached out for the pen. Eliza flinched slightly, thinking he would sign. But Marcus flipped to the final page and wrote, in bold handwriting, I refuse to be silenced, and I refuse to accept injustice as inevitable. Judge Marcus L. Washington. Do you understand what you're signing? Hargrove asked, his voice a mix of smugness and disdain. Clearer than you think, Marcus replied, tone calm as a lake before a storm, and signed with one swift motion. Morris immediately grabbed the document, lips tightened into a smile he thought was subtle. A smart decision, Judge Washington. I believe the storm has passed. As the door closed behind them, Michael turned to his father, eyes wide in disbelief. Dad, did you really give in? That agreement seals everything. Marcus smiled for the first time that day, a smile not of defeat, but of a strategist who had just played the critical move. Did you see what I wrote under my name? Michael frowned. You did die. Under duress. A known legal notation, it states the signature was given under coercion. Any court will recognize it. Eliza's brow furrowed. They'll find out soon. Exactly, but by then, Marcus reached under his pillow and pulled out a small, old model medical recorder. Everything will already be in our hands. That tiny device had captured not just the explicit threats toward Malcolm, but also the use of immigration status as a weapon against children of color. Targeting grandchildren to silence a black man, the oldest form of oppression disguised in modern procedure, Marcus said quietly. Meanwhile, outside the hospital, news channels had switched to breaking mode. White reporters stood beside a few younger black journalists, their questions becoming sharper. Why was there no official statement from the Supreme Court? Why had local police refused to confirm the detained man's identity for 12 hours? Inside the Oakwood Heights Police Department, names like Washington and Rivera had become an obsession. Internal servers were being accessed nonstop. Documents were altered, and high-level meetings took place behind triple-locked doors. A new yet undiscovered audio file played during one such meeting between senior officers. Wipe all peripheral data. If necessary, replace the hard drives. And find a way to breach the hospital's camera system. We need someone inside. That night at Michael's house, a shattering crash broke the oppressive silence. He ran downstairs with a baseball bat in hand. On the living room floor, shards of broken glass glistened under the streetlight pouring in. Every family photo, from Marcus's Yale graduation to the swearing-in at the Supreme Court, had been torn to pieces. On the wall, scrawled in jagged red spray paint, deeper than any physical wound, were the words, "Know your place." Michael clenched his fists, then stepped back, turning to Serena and signaling her to stay quiet. He knew this was a familiar tactic of terror, used by those terrified of losing power when people of color dared to demand justice. The next morning, golden sunlight streamed into the hospital room. Marcus, pale-faced but with unwavering eyes, signed the discharge papers. "You can't leave the hospital in this condition," Dr. Chen protested. "Your heart is stable, but only temporarily." Marcus nodded. "I understand, but if I stay, I'll die. Not from illness, but from silence." Michael arrived just in time, not in the family car, but in a janitor's vehicle borrowed from the hospital staff. Eliza, driving her usual SUV, was leaving publicly, deliberately to draw attention. On the way to the safe house, Marcus reported, "Alexandra Rivera from the Department of Justice has officially opened an investigation, but they need 24 more hours to establish jurisdiction. We must hold out until then." "Where are we going?" Michael asked, hands steady on the wheel. "To the lakeside cabin of James Harriman, my friend from law school. The place is not in my name, has no records and no standard phone signal." When they arrived, Judge Harriman was already waiting. The frail white man, who once gave up an appellate court seat in protest of immigration policies, opened the door without a word. He simply grasped Marcus's hand tightly. "Marcus, the system we built is cracking from within, but I still believe in you." Inside the rustic lake cabin, a wall map, encrypted computers, and stacks of legal documents covered the table. Marcus, despite needing IV drips every few hours, still coordinated everything. "They're trying to wipe the trail, but they can't touch federal systems," he said, eyes bright. "And they can't erase what's already been written into history." At Oakwood Heights Police Department, Caldwell was screaming during a closed-door meeting. "Commissioner Grayson promised to protect me, and now he won't even answer the phone." "Grayson can't protect an officer who threatens children based on their immigration status," the legal advisor replied. "This is no longer local. It's spreading to the state and the feds. We did this for them, silenced a troublemaker, took down that black guy before he stirred things up." Someone in the room murmured coldly, "Maybe they don't need you anymore. You're expendable." The union rep exchanged a knowing look with the attorney. "Not abandonment, just a shift in strategy. We need to steer the narrative away from police fault and toward Judge Washington's personal instability." "A reframing campaign," the assistant added. "If the public questions his mental fitness, his testimony loses weight." "Exactly," the lawyer said. "If we plant enough doubt about his sanity, even hint at dependency on medication, his statements become opinion, not fact." Caldwell narrowed his eyes, lips curling slightly. "Crack the trust." "We call it media context framing," the lawyer corrected, cold as a product brochure. "A few friendly reporters are ready. They'll merely suggest he was once reprimanded for pressuring a witness, that his wife died under sensitive circumstances, and that he's been dependent on prescription meds. No need to prove anything, just ask the right questions." "None of that is true," Caldwell protested. The lawyer sneered. "Truth doesn't matter as much as how people feel about it. You should know that by now." That night, newscasts opened with headlines dripping in insinuation. "Veteran judge or a man on the brink." Internal sources say Washington sought therapy after wife's death. The question remains, is Judge Marcus Washington still fit for the bench? At the lakeside cabin, Marcus scrolled through the headlines, face unreadable. "They're following the playbook," he said. "From Gandhi to Martin Luther King, discrediting the individual is always the first step in silencing the truth." "Should we respond immediately?" an aide asked. "No," Marcus replied, eyes locked on the screen. "Reacting is falling into the trap. Truth doesn't need to be shouted. It needs to be proven." The strategy meeting was interrupted by a call from Alexandra Rivera, this time urgent and severe. Judge Washington, the Oakwood Heights Police Department, just filed a complaint with the district court, claiming the federal investigation is outside jurisdiction and based on invalid evidence. "They're stalling," Marcus concluded, "buying time to destroy records." "Worse," Alexandra said, "they're using it as justification to request a search warrant for your son's home." Eliza interjected, "On what grounds?" "Fabricated allegations, tampering with evidence related to medication," Alexandra explained. "The warrant was signed overnight. My sources say execution is expected within the hour." Michael jumped to his feet. "Serena and the kids are there." "Activate the backup plan," Marcus ordered. voice low and sharp. No argument. Protecting the family is the top priority. Michael left in haste. As his car disappeared past the trees, Marcus turned to Haraman. It's time to use the emergency channel. Haraman nodded, his aged face wrinkling under the weight of the decision. Are you sure, Marcus? Once that door opens, there's no way back. Marcus closed his eyes, took a deep breath. They struck at the most sacred thing, my family, and there is nothing more sacred than justice. Meanwhile, in the suburban neighborhood where Michael's family lived, the lawns lit up under the white glare of 3 unmarked SUVs. Officers executed the search warrant with clipped, harsh commands. They weren't looking for weapons or drugs. They tore through the medicine cabinets, pill bottles, confiscated phones, tablets, even those belonging to the children. A young officer muttered as he took down a framed photo of Marcus's graduation. Such a shame. Used to be inspirational. At the same time, a call from Haraman's encrypted phone went directly to the FBI director's private line. No relay towers, no call logs. It was an emergency channel created during the Watergate era, used only when the integrity of the federal justice system was at stake. By sunrise, no one believed Marcus Washington's case was just a minor incident. National news split their screens. On the left, Marcus's portrait, dignified and resolute. On the right, red letters flashing, "Is a Supreme Court justice mentally unraveling?" Conservative networks suggested he may be a victim of megalomania. Liberal outlets asked, why must a black man prove his innocence even when he's the victim? Twitter overflowed with opposing hashtags, #Justice for Washington versus #Mental Fitness Matters. Marcus monitored the news from the lakeside cabin. Michael and Serena had just returned, their children asleep on their mother's shoulders. Michael's eyes were bloodshot. They ransacked everything, not a single word of apology. "Eliza," Marcus called, "initiate phase 2. We won't respond. We'll expose." "They're crafting a poisonous narrative," Marcus said calmly, shifting focus from police misconduct to character assassination. "They're not just fabricating," Serena said softly, face pale. "I saw it with my own eyes. An officer slipped a prescription bottle into the nightstand drawer, then pretended to find it. He even smiled while writing the report." Marcus's face hardened, his gaze darkened. "Was it caught on camera?" "Our security system was disabled the moment they arrived," Michael replied. "But Mia captured part of it from the second-floor window, before we left." The 12-year-old girl stepped forward, her eyes astonishingly calm. "You once told me, when justice has no eyes, we must be the eyes for it." She handed Marcus a phone. The video was short but clear, an officer planting evidence, with audible, smug laughter. Marcus leaned down and embraced his granddaughter. His eyes welled, but his voice remained steady. "You just made a difference, Mia. This footage could collapse their entire web of lies." On the other side of the city, the lights inside the Oakwood Heights Police Department's conference room were still blazing. Chief Morris and Mayor Dawson were watching an edited video. A media specialist pressed play. On the screen, Washington appeared under manipulated lighting, dim, shadowed, his expression spliced to make him look disoriented and irate. "Two peripheral officers have agreed to testify," someone said. "Both will confirm that Washington behaved erratically and threatened them with his position." Dawson stared intently at the footage. "We're playing with fire. He's the first black man in history to hold that seat." "And that's exactly what makes him dangerous," another voice interjected, the head of the strategy team. "The system doesn't fear the weak. It fears the strong who refuse to play by the rules." Within hours, news broadcasts looped the doctored video, portraying Washington shouting incoherently, color-graded in grim tones, his voice distorted to suggest instability. Police issued a press release. "There are concerns regarding Judge Marcus Washington's conduct during his interaction with law enforcement. The investigation is being expanded." Marcus's response came in the form of a short video, Mia's recording, clear, unedited. It showed a white officer, gloved, slipping a prescription bottle into a drawer, before loudly proclaiming, "We've found what we're looking for." Yet Mia's video only surfaced on a few minor news outlets. Major platforms avoided the story, On social media, the police's edited footage dominated shares, while the truth was buried. By late afternoon, the media storm reached the Supreme Court. Some justices spoke out in support of Marcus, but 3, all white, remained silent. Chief Justice Evelyn Montgomery personally called. "Marcus," she said curtly, "the situation is spiraling. The public no longer sees the court. They see a black man accused of losing control." "And that's the problem," Marcus replied. "No one's asking why I was pulled over at night with no violation. No one's asking why they turned off cameras and tore through my son's home." "We're under pressure to act," Montgomery admitted. "Some suggest you step back from current cases temporarily and let them tell their version unchallenged." "No, Evelyn. I've watched too many black men be silenced already." The pause on the other end was wordless confirmation. At the same time, Michael received devastating news. Clients at his law firm began withdrawing cases. They'd received anonymous emails accusing him of tampering with evidence. Serena, a respected professor, faced calls from students demanding an ethics review, citing her controversial family situation. The twins began receiving disturbing messages. "Does your grandpa know he's crazy? Your whole family's probably on pills." The threats grew more intense by the hour. The school recommended transferring both children to remote classes for safety. That night, Marcus sat on the creaky wooden porch, staring out at the still lake. He once believed legal battles were enough, but he was wrong. The fractures weren't just legal, they were psychological, systemic. In a society where black skin meant presumed suspicion, Michael stepped out, placing a glass of bourbon in his father's hand. Mia finally fell asleep. "She's exhausted," he said. But before she drifted off, she asked, "If you're really the bad guy like on TV?" Marcus closed his eyes. It hurt more than any indictment. "I've pulled my family into my trenches." "You didn't pull anyone in," Michael replied. "They chose to strike because you chose to speak. Maybe I should stop for the family's safety. You once told me justice isn't defended through compromise. What will you teach your granddaughter if you walk away now?" Marcus stayed silent, but his eyes began to shine again. At that moment, Harriman stepped out, face grave. "Michael, they've issued a warrant for your arrest." "On what basis?" Michael was stunned. "Tampering with evidence. They claim you moved the bottle before your father's car was impounded. That's an outright lie." "But it's signed," Harriman said, "and the police are on their way." Marcus gripped the glass in his hand, voice low but razor sharp. "They think we'll retreat if they threaten the family. They're wrong." Michael's phone buzzed. He stepped toward the window to take the call, voice tense. When he returned, his expression had turned to stone. "The firm placed me on administrative leave, without pay, pending investigation. They said there were client concerns about the company's image. Truth is, they're afraid of being associated with a black man slandered by the media." Marcus said nothing, but his eyes narrowed. The truth was clear as day. The takedown campaign had entered its invisible phase, where relationships, reputation, and entire livelihoods were quietly dismantled. Layer by layer, fatally but silently. The house was thick with tension, not despair, but a deep, burning anger toward a system that treated skin color as sufficient evidence of guilt. Eliza Chen walked in, face taut as if she'd just left a political battlefield. "Bad news. The Department of Justice is under pressure to pull out of the case. They're preparing to hand full investigative authority back to the local police." "Pressure from above?" Marcus asked, unsurprised. "Someone's pulling strings. The FBI has been redirected to national security threats, with no specifics on what those threats are." Michael scoffed. "A black man standing firm in the truth, that's the threat." The words landed like a stone. No one disagreed, because they didn't need to. Around midnight, darkness consumed the lake house. Inside, Marcus remained seated, flipping through documents, reviewing every note, his face lit by dim yellow light, reflecting the resilience etched into his very being. It wasn't just legal preparation, it was an act of resistance. Just before dawn, a short beep from the security system signaled someone approaching. A black sedan pulled into the drive. A young woman stepped out, scanned the area, and rang the bell. "I'm Officer Tamara Jackson, Oakwood Heights PD," she said as Haraman opened the door. "I need to speak with Judge Washington immediately." In the living room, she sat across from Marcus. No uniform, no badge. Just a citizen carrying the truth. "Mr. Washington," Jackson began, "I've seen things I can no longer stay silent about. Over the past 18 months, I've collected documents on cases that were manipulated, especially those targeting black citizens." She pulled a USB from her coat. "This contains the original dash cam footage from your car, untampered. It also includes Caldwell's body cam and internal conversations about how to clean up this case." Marcus took the drive, face blank, but his hand trembled slightly. A first crack in the wall of silence. "You know this puts you in danger?" he asked. Jackson looked at him, then nodded. "My father spent 12 years in prison because of a false statement from an officer. I studied criminal justice because I believed the law could fix injustice. Now I know the law can't fix itself unless someone breaks the silence." Michael plugged the USB into the secure system. The screen lit up, footage rolling. Caldwell disabling his body cam. A white officer covertly planting evidence into the car, then nodding to his colleague like checking off a protocol. "That's not all," Jackson continued. "I contacted the attending physician that day, Dr. Patel. He refused to amend the medical report as ordered by his superiors. The original confirms Judge Washington was fully lucid. His blood work matches the prescribed medication." Eliza held the report. "This is irrefutable. Combined with Mia's video, we can prove a multi-level conspiracy from frontline officers to government leadership." By early afternoon, protesters gathered outside Oakwood Heights PD. At first, local activists, but within hours, the crowd swelled with national organizations. Signs reading "Justice for Judge Washington" rose like banners in a full-scale resistance campaign. Former students of Marcus, now judges, scholars, attorneys, released public statements calling the allegations against him a stain on justice disguised as racial smear. Online, former clients shared stories. How Marcus once drove all night to support a rural civil rights case. How he defended immigrants under police threat. But opposing forces didn't stay quiet. Officer Jackson's house was vandalized. "White traitor" was spray-painted across the front door. Unmarked patrol cars circled her block, an unspoken reminder that the system remained. Michael received an anonymous email. "Play nice, or your whole family will be forced out of this town." The charges against him quietly disappeared from records, but without any official dismissal. A dangling threat, blocking him from suing, but never truly free. At dusk, the phone rang. Alexandra Rivera was on the line. "Judge Washington, the FBI has reclaimed the case. Director Callahan personally signed the authorization. There's been a shift." "What changed their minds?" Marcus asked. "Not just Jackson's evidence," she said. 3 other officers stepped forward, with documents, internal files, and patrol logs that show the entire department followed a systemized protocol for targeting people of color. For the first time after days of turmoil, Marcus slowly leaned back in his chair. His eyes didn't leave the screen, where the real footage now played, unedited, undistorted. And for the first time, he allowed himself to hope. Not for himself, but for the truth. Their progress was interrupted by a choked phone call from a shaken officer on duty. "Jackson was ambushed in the parking lot right at precinct headquarters." The voice trembled. "She was beaten unconscious. She's en route to Memorial Hospital, severe head trauma, broken ribs, critical condition." In that moment, the room fell completely silent. This had gone beyond bureaucratic games. This was an execution with a message. Someone was making it clear. Telling the truth, when you're black or when you turn on your white allies, would cost you blood. Marcus gripped the armrest, his hand trembling with rage. They want to silence her testimony permanently. Director Callahan immediately activated emergency protocols. An FBI rapid response team was dispatched to protect the Washington family, and a special surveillance unit was deployed to the hospital. Agent Diana Chen, no relation to Eliza, head of the response team, arrived at the lake house within 30 minutes. "Judge Washington," she said quickly, "we've secured the perimeter. Memorial Hospital is under 24/7 watch. were retrieving footage from security cameras, but many segments were erased, likely internally. Just then, Marcus's phone rang. It was Chief Justice Montgomery. This time, her voice was different, calm but burning. "Marcus," she said, "the Supreme Court convened an emergency session. We reviewed all evidence and issued a joint statement condemning the violations of due process against you. You remain in your position with full institutional backing." Marcus exhaled deeply, for the first time in days. "I only wish integrity didn't have to come from injury and blood." That night, the FBI launched a coordinated raid on the police department, the mayor's office, and the homes of Caldwell and Morris. Investigators seized servers, hard drives, many set to auto-wipe at midnight. At the ICU, Tamara Jackson opened her eyes for a few brief moments. Her face was bruised, her head wrapped in bandages, but her voice was strong enough to confirm. "The attackers were from my unit," she whispered. "They called me a traitor to our kind, then hit me in the head. I turned on the recorder, phone in my pocket. You'll hear Simmons and someone else." Forensic technicians began decoding the recording, live evidence that the very power structure had turned to devour one of its own for daring to dissent. That night, the entire Washington family gathered in the living room. On TV, footage showed FBI agents storming offices, boxes of files, hard drives sealed. A headline scrolled, "Racial Justice Crisis Deepens, from Individual to Institutional." Marcus looked at Eliza, then Michael, then Mia. "Tomorrow is the line," he said. "We've brought the truth to light, but from here on out, the unmasked will stop at nothing to erase it. At that point, this is no longer about law, it's about survival." In a remote hunting shack deep in the woods, Caldwell met with 4 white veteran officers. What they didn't know, the FBI had planted a recorder. Caldwell slammed a hand on the wooden table. "They've got everything. Videos, files. Jackson survived. The feds are everywhere. Morris is getting ready to cut a side deal." One man asked, "Do we still have a way out?" "Only one," Caldwell growled. "If Washington doesn't live long enough to testify, this whole charade never reaches court." That sentence, a thinly veiled kill order, was immediately transmitted to the FBI. Director Callahan didn't hesitate. The threat level was raised to a federal emergency. The entire area surrounding Marcus's home was locked down. Surveillance drones, motion sensors, armed agents on standby. This was no longer just an investigation. It was now an operation to stop the assassination of a Supreme Court justice. The next morning, Marcus was escorted to a secure location. The convoy moved in staggered formation. No fixed route, all phone signals blocked to prevent tracking. A special federal courthouse was converted into a temporary fortress. Never before had a witness, let alone a high-ranking black judge, been protected at this level since Watergate. Prosecutor Alexandra Rivera stood before the grand jury. This was no longer a case, but a criminal network deeply rooted in public institutions. "Judge Washington," she began, "please recount from the beginning, when you were pulled over on the night of Sunday, October 15th. Marcus nodded. For the next 3 hours he spoke, his voice unwavering, not a single detail omitted. The jurors' eyes remained locked on him, as though they could hear the echoes of every wrongful conviction they'd once accepted as coincidence. Outside, investigative teams widened the scope. Financial records, email exchanges, secret codes revealed a sprawling network of money laundering and bribery, linking police, far-right white political figures, and radical religious interest groups. And it all began with a traffic stop. A black man suspected simply because of his skin. The financial records collected revealed that Chief Morris was not only unusually wealthy, but also owned at least 3 suburban properties and maintained offshore bank accounts under shell corporations that existed only on paper. Outwardly, he was a devoted public servant, but in reality, Morris had built his own empire on the backs of wrongly imprisoned black citizens. Officer Caldwell's file was even more alarming. A long chain of excessive force complaints, almost all involving black, brown, or Latin individuals, had been ignored for years. A previously classified internal report revealed that 99% of Caldwell's violent encounters occurred in impoverished minority communities, all resolved internally by deleting footage or coercing victims into signing waivers not to sue. On a seized personal hard drive, the FBI discovered an encrypted chat group Caldwell used to communicate with members of a white supremacist organization, where they shared maps of neighborhoods marked for cleansing and boasted of preemptively cracking down on the jungle folk. There was no longer any doubt this wasn't just individual corruption. It was hard-coded into the operating structure of the entire police department. Internal training documents seized by the FBI revealed a chilling truth. Officers were taught to disable their body cams with 3 simple movements, rehearsed like survival drills. Another covert program trained officers in complaint triage, tagging reports from white citizens as priority while labeling those from people of color as unfounded. Even more disturbing was an internal reward system that awarded points for arrests in minority neighborhoods. Tamara Jackson, once bedridden with injuries inflicted by her own colleagues, was now at the forefront of police reform. Under her leadership, the Oakwood Heights Oversight Board had transformed from a ceremonial body into a powerful model capable of investigation, discipline, and oversight, even of the police chief. But, Michael hesitated, she's been receiving death threats. Seems some still view exposing the truth as betrayal of their race. The FBI is involved, Marcus said curtly, though his eyes darkened. Her safety must be the highest priority. Truth-tellers are always the first targets of those who fear change. The Oakwood Heights investigation ultimately produced 73 convictions, a staggering number. Morris was now imprisoned in Colorado. Dawson received a reduced sentence for cooperation, but her reputation was in ruins. Caldwell filed multiple appeals but failed completely. The evidence was too overwhelming. From video of him choking a black teenager simply for driving too slowly, to text messages describing his victims in terms unprintable by any newspaper. The case's ripple effect was widespread. Police departments across several states that once ignored misconduct were now forced to adopt new policies on body cameras, use of force, and traffic stops, particularly in minority neighborhoods. The federal government had also standardized intervention protocols for departments with systemic violation indicators, based on lessons learned from Oakwood Heights. Still, Marcus knew he was the exception, a black man who had survived a system never built to protect someone like him. Without Mia's video, Jackson's courage, or the network of attorneys he'd known from his judicial career, the truth might have been buried forever. "I received a letter," Marcus said, handing an envelope to Michael. "From James Reynolds." Michael looked up, recognizing the name. The black student arrested for imaginary marijuana odor? Yes, 17. Honor student. Searched without a warrant, no evidence, then framed. Marcus sighed. He spent 6 months in juvenile detention before we intervened and reopened the case. Michael clenched his fist. "We saved a future." "But just one among thousands," Marcus replied, his eyes unable to hide the pain. "How many other Jameses are being crushed before we get there in time?" Michael nodded, his voice firm. "That's why we have to keep going. The new law redefined accountability. And our foundation, it's not a symbol, it's action." Marcus turned to the plaza where people gathered daily, calling for justice in every way, from protest to prayer. "I think of your mother, Elela Nena," he said quietly. "She believed justice couldn't just be a system, it had to be compassion, written into law." Michael gently touched his father's shoulder. "She'd be proud. You've turned wounds into fuel." Marcus was silent for a moment, then whispered, "If Caldwell's bullet had shifted just 15 centimeters, we'd be holding a funeral right now." The sentence hung in the air like an indictment against fate, reminding that sometimes justice only arrives by the mercy of cruel chance. That afternoon at Georgetown University, Marcus gave a speech at the launch of a lecture series named in his honor. Not a dry academic presentation, but a burning reflection. There is a chasm between the law as written and the law as lived, filled with privilege, prejudice, and fear, he said. You, future attorneys, must learn to recognize when the system no longer serves justice, but uses justice as a mask for power. He recalled the moment a gun was pointed at him, the moment his dignity was stripped, not by a verdict, but by prejudice. The title Supreme Court Justice protected me, but how many people of color don't have that shield? He ended with a line that silenced the entire hall. My experience was an exception, and that's what makes it terrifying. Because for far too many Americans, the way I was treated is far too familiar. Though reform was underway, it was neither safe nor widely welcome. And Marcus, with the highest legal standing in America, was now the guardian of doors that history had once slammed shut on people who looked like him. That night, as on every Sunday, he left his office without fanfare, heading to Arlington Cemetery. No bodyguards, no reporters, just him and Ella Lenina. The autumn winds swept through the rows of gravestones like whispers of history. The moonlight fell on Marcus's tired face, its lines carved not only by age, but by the exhaustion of carrying a system never built to protect him, or anyone who looked like him. He knelt before his late wife's grave, hands trembling from the cold, and from memories that had never faded. "You see, Elle," he whispered, his voice choked. "We made it through again, but the cost was blood and memory." He gently touched her name etched in marble, the name that had once been his only anchor when he was dragged from his car by the very people he used to trust as protectors of the law. "I still remember what you said. Justice is never the default for people of color. It's something you have to fight for, inch by inch, verdict by verdict, survival by survival." You were right, so painfully right. In the distance, two FBI agents sat silently in a black car, not out of formality, but because threats of violence still loomed. The name Marcus Washington was no longer just a symbol of reform. To extremists, it was a target to be erased, but he felt no fear. Marcus laid down the bouquet, not roses, but sunflowers, Ella Lenina's favorite, and the symbol he always invoked: turn toward the light even when the world chooses darkness. "I survived, Elle," he said slowly, "but only because that bullet missed by a few inches. If it hadn't, everything we built today would never have existed." He paused, eyes distant. "A single verdict won't erase the fear a black mother feels when her son gets pulled over. A law won't instantly stop the hearts of people of color from tightening when they hear a siren." Marcus stood, heavy with sorrow, but his gaze still burned. He wasn't alone. Behind him were families who lost loved ones with no headlines, youth imprisoned on the lies of officers, dreams crushed simply because of skin color. When he returned home, Marcus didn't take off his coat as usual. He sat at his desk before a framed photo with his wife. The day they took their oaths in court, hand in hand, the only two black people in a room overflowing with white power. He gently touched the image. Memories flooded back like scars that never healed. Marcus knew this truth. Victory was not the end of the road. It was the vow to never turn back. Not to let the law be bent by privilege. Not to let citizenship be a gift, but a given. He opened his notebook, filled with scribbled notes of unresolved cases, names forgotten in statistics. In each name was a human life, in each life a reason not to stop. Marcus looked out the window at a city sleeping peacefully. But inside him, the fire had never gone out. Because this time, justice was no longer a shield for the privileged few. It was the torch he swore to carry for all those without a voice.